Good evening once again. Thank you for having me, Ms. Natalie Osman, your colleagues here at CAS, Mr. Dennis Bailey. I'm quite privileged to be here. I thought that I would be late, but I was able to make it by a few minutes, as politicians would say. We are never late. I think, let me start off with the role of Parliament perhaps in the budget process before I go or I delve into what the youth get from the current budget, what if they get anything, and then moving on to other issues such as land reform, procurement, and so forth. Now, as you may know, the appropriation bill in itself is a requisition of monetary resources by the head of state and his cabinet to Parliament in the fulfillment of Chapter 5, Article 32(2). Now, in layman's terms, this means that it is an expression of national priorities in monetary value. But suppose you're an investor with 61.5 billion to invest in a business. An entrepreneur appears before you with a business proposal and his 23 children. He explains the concept to you, as well as how he will personally drive the business agenda forward. At the conclusion of his presentation, he says, these 23 children will supervise several profit centers of the business. And so if you have any further questions, you should contact any of my 23 children. How would you feel as an investor? Disrespected? Not valued? Undermined? Honourable members of the House today were debating a number of issues around the budget, particularly the youth. And a number of questions came up because this year's budget is themed after the youth or around the youth. But one thing became clear, and that is we must begin to question whether the current way of doing things or the current way in which Parliament is run is actually beneficial to citizens, whether it speaks to Article 32(2) as envisaged in the Constitution, and whether how Parliament is currently run in terms of budgetary debate affords Parliament the relevance and importance that is actually explained in the Constitution. Now, one of the things that I realized was that, in essence, the budget debate takes us back to the debate on separation of powers. And for those of you who would know Charles Montesquieu, philosopher, who spoke on the doctrine of the separation of powers between the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. While there exists much debate about whether Charles Montesquieu advocated only a strict and complete separation of powers, the better view is that in practice, only a partial separation of powers would be workable. But here's the important thing, complemented by further controls. So Charles at some point acknowledged that it is almost impossible to be able to implement the separation of powers fully or strictly. So partial implementation of that doctrine was a workable one, but there had to be, and it had to be complemented by controls. I'm not going to dwell too much on those controls, but two of them are, one, the first is funding. How is Parliament funded? Who determines the funding of Parliament? It is, I'm told to remove my mask. I hope that's okay. I'm fully vaccinated, so. And the current regulation says it's okay. But the second regulation, or the second control, is funding. How is Parliament funded? Should Parliament, in fact, be funded to protect the separation of powers between these three interdependent state organs? And the second control is a strengthened review of the executive by the current parliamentary committee system. We learned today that during the debate, some of us, even when we were doing research, came across the fact that Parliament gets about, for this year, 26,000 that's allocated towards oversight. And that means Parliament is about 10 committees, 2 House committees, 8 speak to different or various ministries. Now, one of the most important roles that Parliament plays is the function of oversight. It is through the committee system that the legislature is able to hold the executive accountable. Through site visits, public hearings. I know some of you might have heard about the abortion public hearings, the legalization of same-sex marriages in Namibia. There are a number of those public hearings that are happening or have been happening. But it is because Parliament has an oversight role to play that is critical to itself and to the nation as an institution. Let me now turn to perhaps the substantive issue of the day. I took some notes. I'm just praying that I left my glasses so I'll be able to see here. Let's look at, I'm sure Mali has gone in depth. And the funny, I was just telling him now that I always run into him at events. I'm like, Mali, you're here again. But it's always good to see you, my friend. I'm sure young people are learning from you and are inspired. I think one of the things that we must be able to express is not just good English, but we must also understand numbers and how budgetary allocations affect our lives, our daily lives. But let us look at the targeted youth spend in greater detail, adding all the obvious and the listed youth programs in the budget, and even including the extra budgetary support from the German government. I got to my figure of around 650 million. When I checked the documentation, I was astonished to find that this is broadly double the allocation for Vote 27, sports, youth, and national service at 331 million, which in turn is marginally higher than the allocations in previous years, but it is higher only for this year. As of 2023, the vote reverts to around 270 million, which is more in line with the regular former allocations of about 250 million per year. So does this mean then that additional appropriations for the youth in a year where the budget theme pivots on youth issues is only 320 million more than in previous budgets? I sincerely hope not, because then the budget is just as one of those political gimmicks. I sincerely hope that plucked out of, or not plucked out of thin air to try and make the budget process appear credible, that the Ministry of Finance has established a solid reputation for inventing fancy acronyms and for budgets and then to forget them and just quickly move on. Take for instance TPAC, right? Does anybody in this room remember TPAC?
Yes, of course.
When we were at UNAM, I remember that was the first political lesson. We did a number of political science modules that were also interlinked with economics modules. And so one of the first things that we were taught was you must understand economics for you to be able to express yourself and to articulate a position politically or otherwise. Now, the fact that both have evaporated, we were looking at TPAC. In 2010, we had the crisis, right, in our country. And last year, we brought a motion to Parliament to say youth unemployment stands currently at 53%, 50.3%. That was by the end of 2021. And we gave a number of suggestions, and one of those was, let's declare a state of emergency during which period government is able to consider and allocate the best resources, not just capital, but also human resources, to come up with a workable plan. What is the way forward? How do we deal with this number of young people who don't have jobs? Young people will send to institutions of higher learning, most of them who are languishing in student debt and joblessness. So I remember that there was a conversation about public procurement. If you look at Kenya, for example, I think in the year 2013, 2014, they had a debate on their Public Procurement Act. And there are a number of objectives each government seeks to achieve with their Procurement Act. Some want equality, efficiency, and so forth. But young people came out, scholars from the academics, young people in business, young entrepreneurs, and they said, why is our government's objective, or at least one of those objectives, not to improve accessibility of young people to procurement opportunities, especially as it pertains to government procurement? So instead of having a blanket approach, and saying, well, everybody can apply and you'll be treated equally, why not have a quota system, the same that we are now saying, well, we want young people to go to parliament, and we want at least 2% or 5%. I don't know what people want nowadays. But come up with a quota system where we say, yes, we agree. Perhaps government's job is not only to create jobs, but it stretches beyond that. It is also creating an enabling environment where these young people can thrive in any sector, in industries, in entrepreneurship, anywhere. So those are conversations that are currently happening. I hope there are people at least here who follow Parliament and what happens there. I think beyond the political gimmicking and the fights, there are relevant conversations that happen in Parliament. And I hope young people do follow those conversations, because it would be unfair and it would be a great injustice to have young people decided for and their future decided for without being in the room, or at least without following that conversation. So it is my biggest hope. I hope I've not run out of time. It is my biggest hope that young people follow those conversations. Now, let me just move on. So I think from what we get this year from the budget currently, and in simple terms, the budget spells out that we are throwing at least 3.3 billion in the water every year, and that this wastage on a grand scale will only increase as time passes. Now consider this 650 million additional youth spent, and it becomes obvious that it cannot nearly compare to the excess interest we pay above the 10% threshold. In fact, this youth spend is a mere 1.1% of expenditure, while the 3.3 billion is slightly more than the 5.5% total of revenue. I hope that this simple comparison is able to demonstrate what a big fuss, in fact, this year's theme is. Because I'm still to give my speech in Parliament, but I guess you will have some sort of advantage to hearing it. But one of the things that I say is that I find the minister's approach to always picking fictional themes to his budget quite interesting. The other year it was Wakanda Forever. This year we are talking about a youth-centered budget. But Wakanda Forever will come and go. It is the struggles of our people that will remain. And for as long as we, as young people, do not engage in these conversations, I don't see how we'll benefit. And if we don't take a stance to be constantly and continuously involved and informed, we'll be losing out big time. Just to finish off, the Development Bank of Namibia, young business owners and women as well, supporting women business owners, women who want to go into the business sector. But one of the things that we found was that we had a meeting with the executive board members, and one of the discovery, they have a skills-based facility. I think Mali will know about it. And this particular skills-based facility targets young people, artisans, young people from TVETs, where young people are taught how to use their hands, carpenters and so forth. But one of the things that we found was that even when these programs are designed and introduced for young people, you still find that young people are expected to have some sort of collateral. And that is unacceptable and must be revisited. We sit in Parliament, and myself and a few of my colleagues always say, look, every person has had an opportunity to be young, right, and benefit from the resources of the country, whether it's the fish of the sea and the soil and so forth, and even become landowners. It is selfish, however, to reach a certain age group and forget about young people, the very future of our country. So I think in the long term, there are a number of programs that must be revisited, and one of those is the skills-based facility with the Development Bank of Namibia. Parliament must be strengthened to play an active role in the budget process. Consultation should not just end in the boardroom offices. I remember there was a year, I'm so sorry, Dennis. I remember there was a year where Parliament actually took the budget to people, and the budget was translated. There were booklets, there were booklets, small booklets, and these booklets were translated into local languages. So whether you speak Oshihero, Shindonga, whatever language. But it's because the budget has to be approved with the consent of the citizens of the country, because they are the sovereigns after all. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to engage, and I do apologize for being late. Thank you so much.